No matter what work-related visa you're applying for in Australia, whether it's a temporary work visa, whether it's an employer-sponsored visa, or whether it is a permanent visa of some sort, the occupation that you are in is actually really important. And that's because Australia is a smaller country. There is only a population of just over 20 million, I think, from the last time I checked. And so there is a huge skill shortage. But obviously that goes in line with trends and what there is a demand for at that moment. So I think years ago, there was a huge shortage of accountants in Australia. And so at that time, accounting was a very popular occupation to be applying for on your skilled visa. And we've seen during COVID that there's a huge shortage of chefs and cooks because there weren't enough people coming from overseas. So there was a huge demand for chefs and cooks at the time. Today, I want to talk about the different occupations that are popular for migration in Australia. They could be for a temporary visa or to a permanent visa. My name is Traci Chen and I'm an immigration lawyer based in Australia. I'm currently the principal lawyer at Mason Chen Law Group. If anybody needs any other migration advice, I'll drop a link below to our website where you can contact me or any of our lawyers. So today's topic will be top occupations for migration in 2022. Okay, I know what everybody's thinking. Oh, she's going to talk about the more popular occupations like nursing or social work or something like that. And yes, I am. It's definitely going to be on the list because it is just the reality at the moment. So first of all, let's talk about nursing and in particular, registered nurses. So registered nurses in Australia is someone who's completed a Bachelor of Nursing degree. Now that's called different names across different universities, but obviously it's an accredited course. When you graduate, you'll be eligible to apply for your registration and licensing with AHPRA, which is the regulators of health occupations here in Australia. You'll also be able to apply for a skills assessment with ANMAC. So just to name a few universities, there's University of South Australia who do it. I know Flinders University do it, as well as Western Sydney University. They're just some universities to name a few. So don't forget, right now I'm specifically talking about registered nurses. So obviously during COVID, there was a huge demand for a lot of different healthcare workers and in particular nursing. But I'll tell you why it is actually very good for permanent residency. So once you graduate as a registered nurse, you apply for your AHPRA registration, you apply for your ANMAC skills assessment. You're eligible for a skills assessment basically right away. Yes, you won't be able to apply for a specific certainty unless you have worked in that specialization for over 3 months, I think. So for example, if you've worked in critical care for 3 months, you'll be able to get a skills assessment that's specific to registered nurse critical care. Or for example, if you worked as a surgical nurse for over 3 months, ANMAC, the specific skills assessing body, will actually give you a skills assessment with that specialization. But also when you actually graduate, there is specific programs to help people find jobs. And at the end of the day, nursing jobs are a lot of government jobs. So I feel like a lot of the nursing graduates, people who studied nursing, found it a lot easier to find a job, which then in turn becomes one of the requirements for employer sponsorship for general skilled migration anyway, whether it be the 491, 189 or 190 visa. So because of that, that's why nursing is good. So let me just recap. Once you finish your degree, the accredited degree, you are eligible for your AHPRA registration. You are then eligible for your ANMAC skills assessment. And depending how long you've been working in that specialty, you could even get a specific skills assessment, which overall is no huge issue. However, some states are looking for specific specialties. And because there are so many different companies, entities that hire nurses, right from, private aged care homes to community centers through to hospitals, there's a lot of jobs out there. And then just like other countries, Australia did go through COVID. And a lot of the nurses here in Australia were overworked. During that time, we definitely needed nurses. So for that reason, because from the time you graduate until you collect all your eligibility documents, it calls for a more seamless process. You'll see, for example, in general skilled migration, the key requirement is your skills assessment. And occupations such as registered nurse, it is easier to get a skills assessment. For example, an occupation like life scientist or an occupation like nutritionist, to even be eligible for a skills assessment, because it's assessed by a different skills assessing body, those ones are specifically assessed by BetAssess, you have to first get the job, work for 1 year, and then you'll be eligible. And I think the hardest thing for occupations like life scientist, for example, when you graduate, say, for example, a Bachelor of Biotechnology or something like that, that is related to that field, the career outcome is usually a life scientist. It's so hard. It's not common for university graduates to walk out and get a scientist role. Although there's many people who can score the job, it usually takes a bit of work. You have to do a few things before you can get there. Just like lawyers. A lot of people who graduate from a law degree, a lot of people don't graduate, walk out into a role to be a lawyer. A lot of them walk out into jobs as paralegals, for example. Whereas with nursing, the programs are kind of there. When they graduate, they get their registration and you start working as a registered nurse. The other thing is that the salary is pretty good for nursing here in Australia. There are certain rates that apply to registered nurses and you are paid those rates. So I think in South Australia, it could be anywhere between 70k to 100k for the more senior positions. 70,000 to 100,000 Australian dollars. Which is, I think it's pretty good. And then you also get your penalty rates and also overtime. So that's nursing. And I know that everybody's like, oh, here she goes again. But I really wanted to explain why it's so good. And then no doubt there's a huge demand at the moment. Hospitals are absolutely so busy. You've probably seen on the news that, there's people that are in the ambulance ramps because they just can't get a bed because the hospitals are just so over capacity at the moment. The next occupation I'm going to talk about is chefs. And there's a reason for this, so let me get into it. So I feel like chefs have always been in high demand in Australia. I've worked for companies like immigration firms where basically the only visas we lodged were for chefs and cooks. And I think that because Australia is such a multicultural country and the hospitality industry is ever growing, I think that there's a huge demand for chefs in general here in Australia. So basically in Australia, the standard educational requirements would be a certificate 3, 4 in commercial cookery, plus a diploma in hospitality. Once you have that, you'll be eligible for your 485 visa, then you'll get your work experience to get your skills assessment. I'll do some separate videos on that because the whole skills assessment requirements gets a little bit difficult. Let's assume you've progressed through that and you've completed your qualifications. You could apply for a temporary work visa, TSS, which is the subclass 482, or you could apply for any of the GSM visas, which should be 491, 189, or 190 once you have your skills assessment. And I guess the main thing there is that there is plenty of chef jobs here in Australia. And as I said, all the visas I just mentioned require an employer of some sort. And for a lot of people, they find it easy to get a job as a chef. Most of my clients who are chefs, they have a job in their field. And then when you progress on to different visas in Australia that will lead to permanent visas, so all of the ones I just spoke about, I feel like there is a very clear pathway for it. So for example, employer sponsorship, whether it's the TSS, temporary skilled work visa first, for a few years on the 482, then you apply for your permanent residency through the 186, is extremely realistic because a lot of employers employ overseas workers. So for example, if I'm going to open a Chinese restaurant, I want like a chef from China, someone that's going to cook really, really good, authentic stuff. Someone that's very trained from China, for example, just an example. And I know that's also a big thing in Indian restaurants as well. They want someone who has been trained properly and understands all the authentic recipes. And so for a lot of restaurants, for a lot of hospitality businesses, they regularly sponsor their chefs. And that's a good thing. Because one of the hardest things when I speak to clients is that, I don't know if my employer will sponsor me. And for chefs, it's highly, highly likely they will, because it's a program that they regularly use. You'll probably be surprised if you speak to a lot of, restaurant owners that will be like, yeah, we're already sponsoring. You probably find that your colleagues, in the restaurant that you're working with may even be on a sponsorship. So that's why it's really good, because it's very realistic for your employer to sponsor you. I think it's harder in different industries. So for example, if you're in digital or, engineering, some of the larger companies, I think they have no sponsoring policies, which makes it hard. So I'm being a realist here. Migration law, all these things is all one thing, but what is realistic is also another. So I think this is really realistic. So second of all, GSM. So I'm talking about 189, 190, 491 visas. Again, if you look at the state requirements to be nominated for a state visa, whether it be 491 or 190, what does the requirement say? You must be working in your field for 3 months, 12 months, 24 months before you apply. If you look at the different state requirements, Queensland, 6 months in your field. Victoria, there's no minimum working requirements, but you must be working in your field. And then South Australia, I think when I last checked 491 was like 24 months or something like that. But again, that's good because again, it's probably realistic to think that you will score a job as a chef when you graduate. And so that's what makes the process easier. So I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to get at here. I'm trying to get at like what makes the process easier. Because if you look at all the trends for whether it be employer or whatever it is, you need a job in your field. It's in that field. So there's no point studying something where, it may be in high demand, but it's hard to find a job in your field. Like, for example, IT is good. And so if you're studying IT, that's an awesome thing. But when I look at the overall requirements, if you're working in your field, it's harder to land a job in the digital sector. It's not impossible. I have plenty of clients that are doing it. We've been successful in obtaining the 189, 190, 491 for them, and as well as some of the employer sponsorship. But most definitely I get more feedback that, hey, it's hard to find a job in that field. So that's what I mean by that. Now, I'll do another video with more occupations later on, but the last one I want to talk about is social worker. So social worker, again, like the other two occupations I've just mentioned, are on the medium-term list. You have to study a degree that is accredited for social work. So Bachelor of Social Work, and also can be Masters of Social Work. Now, there is certain prerequisites to get in, just like nursing, you usually have to have a science background and English requirements. That is the same for social work, but look, most of my clients do meet the minimum requirements for it. And once you graduate, you'll need to get your English and all of that and your skills assessment. And the skills assessing body for social workers is AASW. So I think it stands for Australian Association of Social Workers. And as long as you studied an accredited degree and meet the minimum English requirements, you're eligible for a positive skills assessment. And so that's all good. So you finish, you graduate, and you get your skills assessment, and then you go into the workforce. Again, a lot of my clients have provided me feedback that it's easier for them to get a job in social work. There's jobs out there. Now, I think a lot of the jobs are not called social worker. So I think when you search online, the job isn't social worker. It might be more like case manager or something like that. So do remember that. So a lot of my clients that graduated, got a job pretty quickly, started working to meet the state requirements or whatever it is, and meet the requirements for what it is to obtain the next visa. The other point I want to make here is that social workers work in aged care settings, in hospital settings, and at the moment there is a huge demand for social workers as well. So overall, I think it is a great occupation to study. Just like for nurses and chefs, a lot of employers do mention that they will sponsor. So just like nurses, a lot of hospitals sponsor for sure. For chefs, as I mentioned, restaurants and all of that do sponsor. And then aged care settings, yeah, I've had conversations with business owners of aged care homes, of hospitals that have agreed to sponsor their employees. So I know there's a lot of occupations that I haven't mentioned, and I'll do that in part 2 video the week after, because there's a lot for you guys to think about. At the end of the day, do remember this. Don't just study something because you want to get permanent residency. I guess that way it never works out. But you have to study something that is going to help towards permanent residency, that has good career prospects and has good salary. At the end of the day, when year 12s are picking their courses to study at university, they definitely consider all of that, as well as ensuring it's a course that they will actually love. Like for me, I know I couldn't do anything in healthcare because I am so scared of blood or anything like that. Sometimes I cut myself when I'm cooking and I just want to faint. And it's like the most smallest cut. And my partner's just like, that is the smallest cut. What are you crying about? And I just want to faint because I see that little bit of blood. And that's the way it is for me. So do consider all of those things. I have had clients who try to do a bit of nursing, but then they realize that it just wasn't for them. So do your research. Make sure it is something that's good. Make sure it's something that you can see yourself doing and will be passionate about, because no matter what, if you want to apply for permanent residency or, employer sponsorship or whatever it is, you need to be working in your field. So whether it will take, 1 year, 2 years, or 4 years for you to get there, that whole time you may need to be working in your field. So that's something to definitely think about. So next week I will do part 2 and we'll talk about what other occupations are good to apply for essentially permanent residency here in Australia. If you have any specific occupations you want to know about, drop it in the comments below, because then I will know. And if it is actually good for permanent residency, I will definitely talk about it. Now, if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with people who need it. I will drop my contact details in the link below, so feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.